If your zucchini plant looks healthy but keeps giving you only a few fruits, then there is a good chance you are making the same mistake I made years ago, and it has nothing to do with fertilizer watering schedules or expensive soil mixes. The real problem is often the container itself, and most gardeners never notice it until the season is almost over. I have seen people spend months caring for a zucchini plant that should have produced bucket after bucket of fruit, only to end up with half the harvest they expected. The surprising part is that the plant may still look green and alive, so the mistake stays hidden. That is why so many gardeners keep repeating it year after year. When a zucchini plant is placed in a container that is too small, the roots run out of room long before the plant reaches its full potential. At first, everything seems fine. The leaves grow, new flowers appear. You start thinking you're on the right track. Then something strange happens. The fruits stay small. Some flowers fall off. Growth slows down. You water more often, but the results do not improve. Have you ever noticed this happening even when the plant looks healthy from a distance? If so, you are not alone because this is one of the most common container gardening mistakes I have ever seen. I learned this lesson the hard way after losing a large part of my own harvest. Back then, I believed a container was just a container, and as long as the plant fit inside it, everything would work out. I was wrong. What I discovered changed the way I grow zucchini even today. Most people focus on what they can see above the soil, but the real story is happening underneath, where the roots are fighting for space every single day. Here's where things get interesting, because the difference between a poor harvest and an impressive harvest can come from a simple choice made before the seedling is even planted. The good news is that fixing this mistake does not require more money or more work. In fact, one old method I was shown many years ago makes the entire process easier and helps the plant take care of itself much better. But before I explain that method, there is another problem connected to container size that catches almost everyone by surprise, and it may be costing you even more zucchini than you realize. The next thing most people do not realize is that a container that looks large enough in spring can become a serious problem by the middle of summer. I remember watching one of my zucchini plants years ago and wondering why it seemed thirsty all the time. Every morning the soil looked fine. By afternoon the leaves were drooping. I watered again, and the plant recovered for a few hours. Then the same thing happened the next day. At first I blamed the weather because summer temperatures were high. Then I blamed the variety. After that I blamed myself for not feeding the plant enough. The truth was much simpler. The container was too small to hold the amount of moisture a mature zucchini plant needed. This is where many gardeners lose a large part of their harvest without realizing it. The plant spends so much energy dealing with stress that it has less energy available for producing fruit. The leaves may still be green, and the plant may still produce flowers, but the harvest never reaches its full potential. Most people get this wrong because they judge container size by the size of the young seedling. A small transplant does not look like it needs much room, but zucchini grows fast, much faster than many beginners expect. Within a short time, the root system expands and starts filling every available space. When that happens, water disappears quickly and nutrients are used up faster than expected. Here is where things get interesting. Two zucchini plants can receive the same sunlight, the same water, the same fertilizer. Yet one can produce far more fruit simply because its roots have more room. I learned this after comparing plants side by side. The difference was impossible to ignore. One plant struggled through the season, while the other kept pushing out healthy zucchini week after week. Very little else was different. That experience taught me something important. Bigger containers are not really about growing bigger plants. They are about creating stability. The soil stays moist longer. The roots stay cooler. The plant experiences fewer periods of stress. Little by little, those advantages add up. Few people talk about this because it is not as exciting as discussing fertilizers or special gardening products. But the old gardeners who taught me years ago always paid attention to root space first. They knew that a strong harvest starts below the surface, and there is one specific container size that consistently changes the results for zucchini growers. Many gardeners think they know the number already. Most of the time they guess too small. In the next part, I will show you exactly where that line is and why crossing it can completely change what happens during the busiest weeks of the season. Now let me show you the point where things start to change. Over the years, I have grown zucchini in all kinds of containers. I tried buckets that seemed large at the time. I tried decorative pots that looked beautiful on a patio. I even tried reusing containers that I already had because I wanted to save money. Some worked better than others, but a clear pattern appeared again and again. Whenever the container was smaller than what the plant truly needed, the harvest suffered. It did not matter how carefully I watered or how much attention I gave the plant. The results were always limited. What finally made a real difference was giving each zucchini plant enough soil volume to support steady growth from spring through late summer. Most people are surprised when they hear this because the container needs to be larger than they expect. Many gardeners focus on the width of the pot and forget about depth. Others focus on depth and ignore width. The plant needs both. The roots do not grow in a straight line. They spread in every direction looking for moisture and nutrients. When they hit the walls of a small container too soon, the plant begins operating with restrictions that cannot easily be fixed later. This changes everything. A zucchini plant that has enough room from the beginning develops a stronger root system before the heavy fruit production stage arrives. When summer heat increases, the plant is already prepared. When several fruits begin developing at the same time, the roots are able to support that demand. Few people do this because larger containers seem unnecessary when the plant is young. That is exactly why so many gardeners miss out on a significant part of their harvest. I was shown an old method many years ago by a gardener who always had more zucchini than he could use. He told me to think about the plant at its largest size rather than its current size. That simple idea stayed with me. Instead of choosing a container that fit the seedling, I started choosing one that fit the mature plant. The difference was visible within a single season. The plant stayed productive longer. The leaves remained stronger during hot weather. Fruit production became more consistent instead of coming in short bursts, followed by slow periods. But here's the part that most gardeners overlook. Even when they finally choose a larger container, there is another mistake waiting inside that container itself, and it is a small detail that costs people a surprising number of zucchini every year, and it often starts before the first flower ever opens. Once gardeners finally move their zucchini into a larger container, they often expect the problem to be solved. I thought the same thing. I remember feeling confident after giving my plants much more room, and I expected a huge harvest right away. The plants certainly looked better, the leaves grew larger, the stems became thicker, everything seemed to be moving in the right direction. But then I noticed that some plants were still performing better than others, even though the containers were nearly identical. That is when I discovered another detail that very few people pay attention to. The container may be large enough, but what fills that container matters just as much. Most people make the mistake here because they pack the container too tightly. They fill it with heavy soil that becomes dense after repeated watering. At first it looks fine because the plant is small. A few weeks later the soil settles and the roots have a harder time spreading through it. The plant survives, but it does not thrive. This is where many gardeners unknowingly limit their harvest. A larger container gives roots room to grow, but the roots still need a comfortable place to move. Years ago, an older gardener showed me a simple method that costs almost nothing. He mixed materials that helped keep the soil loose and allowed water to move evenly through the container. It was not complicated, it was not expensive. In fact, most people already have access to what they need. After I started using that approach, I noticed something interesting. The soil stayed more consistent, watering became easier, the plants looked less stressed during hot afternoons. Most people do not know this, but Zucchini roots prefer stability more than constant attention. Gardeners often try to solve every problem by doing more. Sometimes the better solution is creating conditions where the plant can do more on its own. That saves time and money while producing better results. Have you ever had a zucchini plant look great one week and then suddenly slow down for no obvious reason? If so, there is a good chance the roots were struggling below the surface long before you saw any signs above it. The real problem often starts where nobody's looking. This changes everything because once you understand that principle, you stop chasing symptoms and start preventing them from appearing in the first place. But there is another mistake that is even more common than poor soil structure. In fact, I would say the majority of container gardeners make it every summer, and it can reduce harvests even when the container size is perfect and the soil is excellent. The mistake I am talking about is watering based on habit instead of what the plant actually needs. This becomes even more important once you start using the correct container size, because larger containers behave differently than smaller ones. Many gardeners spend years learning how to manage small pots that dry out quickly. Then they move to a properly sized container and continue using the same watering routine. I did exactly that. Every morning I watered because that was what I had always done. It felt responsible. It felt like good gardening. The problem was that the plant did not always need that water. Sometimes the soil was still holding enough moisture from the day before. Little by little, the roots were sitting in conditions that were not ideal. The plant continued growing, but fruit production was not as strong as it could have been. Most people get this wrong because they are trying to help. They see a large plant and assume it must need more water every day. In reality, zucchini prefers balance. Too little water creates stress. Too much water creates a different kind of stress. The frustrating part is that both situations can look surprisingly similar from above. The leaves may droop, growth may slow, fruit production may become inconsistent. That is why many gardeners keep adding more water when the real solution is to pause and check the soil first. An older gardener showed me a simple habit many years ago. Before reaching for the watering can, he would always check the soil below the surface. It took only a few seconds. No special tools, no extra expense. That small habit saved water and produced healthier plants. I started doing the same thing, and the results were hard to ignore. My zucchini plants became more predictable. Instead of producing a few fruits and then slowing down, they continued producing steadily through much of the season. Few people do this because it seems too simple. Many gardeners believe the answer must be complicated. Sometimes the old methods survive for a reason. They work. Here is where things get interesting. Once the container size is correct and watering becomes more consistent, the plant enters a completely different stage. Growth becomes stronger. Flowers appear more regularly. New fruits begin developing faster. At that point, many gardeners think they have solved everything. I thought the same thing, but there is one final mistake that quietly steals harvests even from experienced growers. It happens right when the plant looks its healthiest and most productive. Because of that, most people never recognize it until the season is nearly over. The final mistake catches gardeners off guard because it appears at the exact moment when everything seems to be working. The container is large enough. The soil is in good condition. Watering has become more consistent. The plant is growing fast and producing flowers. Most people look at that situation and assume the hard part is over. That is what I used to think. Then I started noticing that some of my healthiest looking zucchini plants were still producing fewer fruits than expected. At first it made no sense. The leaves were large and deep green. The stems were strong. The plants looked like they should be loaded with zucchini, yet the harvest did not always match the appearance. This is where many gardeners overlook something important. A zucchini plant can spend too much energy supporting extra growth that no longer helps fruit production. Few people talk about this because gardeners naturally enjoy seeing a large plant. Bigger leaves and more stems feel like signs of success. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. An older gardener showed me a simple practice years ago that changed how I looked at mature zucchini plants. He taught me to pay attention to airflow and light around the center of the plant. He explained that crowded growth can create hidden problems even when the plant appears healthy from the outside. I followed his advice and noticed a difference almost immediately. The plant became easier to manage, flowers were easier to spot, developing fruits received better exposure, harvesting became simpler. Most people do not know this, but small improvements in plant structure can have a noticeable effect over the course of an entire season. This is not about cutting the plant back aggressively. It is about helping the plant focus its energy more effectively. The result is often a steadier harvest and fewer surprises later in the season. Here is where things get interesting. Once I combined the right container size with stable watering and better plant management, the harvest became far more reliable. I was no longer depending on luck or perfect weather. The plants had a stronger foundation from the beginning. That foundation is what many gardeners miss. They spend time searching for special products while overlooking the basic decisions that matter most. The amazing part is that none of these changes require expensive equipment or complicated techniques. They are simple adjustments that can be repeated season after season. But before we finish, there is one thing that ties all of these lessons together. It is the reason some gardeners consistently harvest basket after basket of zucchini, while others struggle despite working just as hard. That final piece is what brings everything together. When I look back at all the seasons I spent growing zucchini in containers, one lesson stands above everything else. The biggest harvests rarely came from working harder. They came from making a few important decisions correctly at the very beginning. That is why the container size mistake is so costly. Once the season is underway, it becomes difficult to completely fix what started with limited root space. The plant can survive. It can even produce a few good fruits. But it often never reaches the level it was capable of reaching. Most people do not realize how much potential they lose because they never see what the same plant could have done under better conditions. That is exactly what happened to me for years. I thought my harvests were normal because I had nothing to compare them with. Then I started giving my zucchini more room. I paid attention to the soil. I stopped watering on autopilot. I made sure the plant stayed open and healthy as it matured. Little by little, the results changed. The harvest became larger. The plants remained productive longer. I spent less time trying to solve problems because many of those problems never appeared in the first place. This changes everything because it gives you more control without requiring more effort. That is something many of us appreciate as the years go by. We want simple methods that work. We want results we can repeat. We do not want to spend money chasing solutions that may not help. The good news is that the most important improvement often costs nothing more than choosing the right container before planting day arrives. Few people do this because the mistake looks harmless at first. The seedling seems small. The container seems large enough. Then summer arrives and the hidden limits begin showing themselves. If this happened to you before, you are certainly not alone. Most gardeners make this mistake at least once. The important thing is recognizing it early and using that knowledge in the next season. That old advice I received many years ago still guides me today. Think about the mature plant, not the young plant. Give the roots the space they will need later, rather than the space they need today. It is a simple idea, but the results can be surprisingly powerful. The next time you prepare a container for zucchini, take an extra moment before planting. That one decision may be the difference between a plant that struggles through the season and a plant that keeps rewarding you with harvest after harvest. And once you see that difference for yourself, you will never look at container size the same way again.